My husband sent me to Paris alone. A solo trip, he said. A gift. A chance for me to rest. As I stepped into the taxi, our old gardener suddenly reached out and grabbed my wrist. His hand was rough, shaking. His voice dropped so low I almost didn't hear it. "Ma'am, please don't go. Trust me." I froze. For a second, the driver cleared his throat, uncomfortable. My husband stood by the front door, smiling politely as if nothing unusual was happening at all. I gently pulled my hand free. I nodded at the gardener, the way you do when you don't want to cause a scene. Then I got into the taxi. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and let me know where you're watching from." The car rolled down our long driveway, past the oak trees we planted decades ago. I watched my husband grow smaller in the rearview mirror. He raised one hand and waved, just once. Something about it felt final. I asked the driver to stop at the corner. I told him I'd forgotten my phone. He shrugged, turned the car around, and dropped me off quietly. I waited until he was gone, then walked back through the side path, keeping close to the hedges. I didn't go back into the main house. I slipped into the guest house instead. I had lived on that property for 37 years, raised children there, buried memories in its walls. Yet hiding in the guest house felt strangely natural, as if some part of me had known I would need to disappear. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and listened. The main house was quiet at first, too quiet. Then doors opened, footsteps, drawers sliding out, the sound of tape ripping. This was not the sound of a husband seeing his wife off on a vacation. I am 68 years old. I am not dramatic. I have learned the difference between intuition and imagination. This was not imagination. Earlier that morning, my husband had been unusually efficient. My suitcase was already packed, my passport laid neatly on the kitchen counter. He insisted I wear the navy coat, even though the forecast said mild temperatures. He had even arranged a car to pick me up early, before the neighbors were awake. "You deserve this," he'd said. "You've given everyone else enough." At the time, I'd smiled. I always did. From the guest house window, I could see the driveway clearly. I could see the front door. I waited. 1 hour later, a black van pulled in. It wasn't a rental. No logo. Tinted windows. It parked close to the garage, not the front entrance. 2 men stepped out. They wore dark jackets, not uniforms. One carried a hard-sided briefcase. My heart didn't race. It slowed. They didn't knock. My husband opened the door for them. They didn't shake hands like guests. They nodded like people who had already been here before. I pressed my palm against the glass to steady myself. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. Not into panic, into clarity. I was never meant to come back from Paris. Not to this house, not to this life. Whatever that plane ticket was for, it wasn't a vacation. It was an absence, a clean one. I stayed perfectly still. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I watched. I stayed in the guest house until the sun dipped lower and the shadows stretched across the lawn. From where I sat, I could see the back of the main house, the windows reflecting light but giving nothing away. I thought about the woman I had been that morning, standing in the kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to my husband talk about Paris cafes and museums, as if he had planned every detail for my enjoyment. I had nodded, folded my hands, and let him speak. That was how I had survived a long marriage, by listening more than I spoke. After my children moved out, the house had grown quieter. Too quiet. My husband filled that silence with schedules and decisions made without me. He called it efficiency. I called it peacekeeping. It was easier not to argue, easier to let him lead. Over time, I became a guest in my own life. I noticed it in small ways. My name missing from new account statements, contractors addressing questions to him, even when I was standing right there. Invitations phrased carefully, as if my presence were optional. I told myself it was normal. People change. Marriages evolve. That's what I said when friends asked how I was doing. From the guest house, I watched the lights flick on inside the main house. The men were still there. I could see their silhouettes move past the windows, slow and deliberate. Papers were spread out on the dining table. The table where I once hosted Thanksgiving dinners for 12 people, where grandchildren spilled juice and laughed. I remembered scrubbing that table late at night, long after everyone else had gone home. The gardener had worked for us for over 20 years. He had planted the roses along the fence. He had fixed broken sprinklers without being asked. He had seen everything change, little by little. People like him notice things others overlook. That morning, when he grabbed my wrist, there was fear in his eyes. Not confusion, not gossip, fear. I replayed his words again and again. Please don't go. Trust me. The black van stayed for nearly 40 minutes. When it finally left, the men carried fewer items than they had brought. My husband walked them out. He didn't wave this time. He stood alone in the driveway for a long moment after they were gone. He rubbed his face with both hands, then straightened his jacket and went back inside. I exhaled slowly. This was not about a vacation. This was not about rest. This was about control. I thought about Paris, about how far it was, about how easy it would be for someone my age to feel lost there. Jet lag, language barriers, missed calls. I thought about how quiet my phone would be once I boarded that plane. I checked my purse. My passport was still there. My phone, my credit card, all intact, at least for now. As darkness settled in, the house went still again. Too still. The kind of stillness that comes after something irreversible has been decided. I did not confront my husband. I did not step out of hiding. I needed to know more. I needed to see how far he was willing to go. At 68, you learn that the loudest truths are often revealed in silence. I lay down on the narrow bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I listened. I waited. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Not yet. Morning came quietly. I woke to the sound of birds in the trees and the faint hum of traffic beyond the property. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered the narrow bed, the guest house ceiling, and the black van. I stayed still and listened. The main house came to life slowly. Footsteps above me, the coffee machine, a door opening and closing. My husband moved through his routine like any other morning, as if nothing unusual had happened the day before. That was what unsettled me most. I waited until I was sure he had left for his morning walk. He always walked at the same time, the same route, headphones on, unreachable. Once the front door closed, I stepped outside. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. The roses along the fence were blooming. Everything looked exactly as it always had. I entered the main house through the back door. Nothing appeared disturbed at first glance. The living room was tidy, the cushions arranged just so. My framed photos still lined the shelves, though I noticed one missing from the hallway. The picture from our anniversary 5 years ago. I couldn't remember moving it. I went into the study. The desk drawers were closed but not locked. I opened the bottom one. Empty. That drawer had always held old documents, insurance policies, paperwork I never bothered to read because I trusted him to handle it. I trusted him. On the desk sat a manila folder I hadn't seen before. No label. Inside were copies, not originals. Property documents. Power of attorney forms. My name appeared repeatedly, but the signature lines were blank. Except one. A form authorizing temporary medical decision-making in the event of overseas travel. Paris. I sat down slowly. I had signed that document months ago. He'd told me it was routine, something recommended by our lawyer. I hadn't read past the first page. I rarely did anymore. I'd grown tired of feeling like I was always behind, always asking questions that annoyed him. The front door opened. I closed the folder and slid it back into place just as my husband walked in. He stopped when he saw me. "Oh," he said. "You're still here?" "Still here. My flight isn't until tonight," I replied evenly. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then he smiled. "Of course. I forgot." He poured himself coffee, his back to me. "You should rest today." "Big trip." "I plan to," I said. He didn't ask where I'd slept. He didn't ask why I was dressed in yesterday's clothes. He didn't ask anything at all. Later that afternoon, the gardener returned. He pretended to trim the hedges near the guest house, but when my husband went inside to take a call, the gardener looked up at me. "They were here again last week," he said quietly. "Those men." I didn't respond. I just waited. They asked about access points, about schedules, about when you'd be away. He swallowed. I didn't like it. "When were they told I'd be leaving?" I asked. He hesitated. "Before the tickets were booked." That settled it. I spent the rest of the day watching my husband move through the house. He made phone calls in rooms he rarely used. He kept his voice low. He checked his watch often. That evening, he reminded me to set an alarm for the airport. I smiled and nodded. That night, I returned to the guest house. I packed nothing. I charged my phone. I wrote down names, times, details. The way the men stood, the way my husband avoided my eyes. I wasn't confused anymore. I was being managed, and I had no intention of cooperating. The night before my supposed departure passed slowly. I did not sleep. I listened to the house breathe the way you do when you've lived somewhere long enough to know every sound. The pipes settling, the faint click of the thermostat, the floorboard outside the guest house that always creaked when someone stepped on it. Just after midnight, I heard that creak. I stayed still. Footsteps crossed the yard. Not hurried. Careful. A flashlight beam swept briefly across the grass, then disappeared. Someone checked the side gate. Someone who knew exactly where it was. I counted the steps until they moved away. In the morning, my husband knocked on the guest house door. He never knocked before. He opened it without waiting for an answer. "Ready for your big day?" he asked. His voice was light. "Practiced." "I am," I said. He glanced around the room, too quickly, as if confirming something, as if checking that nothing had changed. He handed me a printed itinerary, times highlighted, a car scheduled, a hotel address circled in pen. "I'll call you when you land," he said. "You always do," I replied. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We drove to the airport together. He insisted, said it was the least he could do. The drive was quiet. He filled the silence with small talk about traffic and weather, things that didn't matter. At the terminal, he helped unload my suitcase. He hugged me, stiffly, kissed my cheek. "Text me when you're through security." "I will." He watched me walk toward the sliding doors. I didn't look back. I went through security. I waited until he would have left. Then I walked into the restroom, sat on a bench, and waited another 30 minutes. When I was sure, I exited through the side doors and took a cab back home. The house was already different when I returned. The study door was locked. Boxes sat stacked in the garage, labeled with dates, not names. My date. Inside one box, I recognized the edges of photo frames. Inside another, my winter coats. I closed the lids carefully. That afternoon, the gardener found me by the rose bushes. "They're coming again tonight," he said. "Earlier than before." "For how long?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know." I thanked him. I spent the rest of the day making myself invisible. I stayed in the guest house. I kept the lights off. I charged my phone and turned the sound down. At dusk, the black van returned. This time there were 3 men. They didn't bring paperwork. They brought gloves. They entered through the garage. I heard drawers open, cabinets, the low murmur of voices. One of them laughed. Not kindly, my husband's voice stayed calm. Detached. "She won't be back for weeks," he said. "Plenty of time." That was when I understood the full shape of it. This wasn't about removing me for a while. This was about rewriting me out of the house entirely. I sat on the bed and folded my hands in my lap. My heart was steady. My thoughts were clear. I had crossed the point of disbelief. They finished within an hour. When the van left, my husband locked the garage and stood alone in the driveway again, just like the day before. He looked relieved. That night, I made my decision. I would not confront him. I would not warn him. I would not disappear the way he expected. I would let him believe his plan was working. And then, when everything was in place, I would step back into the story he thought he had ended. On my terms. By morning, the house felt hollow. Not empty. Hollow. As if something essential had been scooped out overnight and the walls were still adjusting to the absence. My husband acted lighter. He hummed while making coffee. He left cabinet doors open, something he never did. He spoke to me as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't watched strangers pack pieces of my life into boxes the night before. "Your flight lands in a few hours," he said casually. "You'll be tired." "Yes," I replied. "Very." He checked his phone often that morning. Each time it buzzed, he turned slightly away from me. I didn't ask who it was. I already knew. Around noon, a moving truck arrived. No logo, no company name, just a white truck with a temporary permit taped to the windshield. They didn't ring the bell. My husband opened the door before they could knock. I stayed in the guest house, watching through the narrow window. 2 men stepped out, clipboard in hand. They greeted my husband like an old acquaintance. "Everything ready?" one of them asked. "Yes," my husband said. "Focus on the garage and the study." My study. They worked efficiently, quietly. Items were carried out wrapped in blankets, boxes loaded without labels, no inventory list that I could see. This wasn't a move. It was a removal. I recognized the edge of my cedar chest, the one my mother gave me when I turned 18. I recognized the blue vase from the mantel, chipped slightly at the base. The lamp I read under every night. Piece by piece, my presence was erased. I thought about walking out, standing in the driveway, asking a single question. But Dang 3 teaches patience. By early afternoon, the truck was gone. The garage looked clean, too clean, the way rooms do after a crime scene has been wiped down. My husband came to the guest house shortly after. I just spoke to the airline, he said. There's a delay. You won't land until late tonight. He watched my face closely when he said it. That's unfortunate, I replied. Yes, he said softly. Very. That was when I realized the lie wasn't for me. It was for someone else. I waited until he left again, then walked into the main house. I moved slowly, touching the walls, grounding myself. The study was locked, but the bedroom wasn't. My closet was half empty. Only his clothes remained on the right side. Mine had been cleared out with precision. Dresses I wore often were gone, the practical ones, the coats, the shoes I favored. Left behind were the things no one would miss. Old sweaters, shoes with worn soles, evidence of intent. On the bed lay a folded piece of paper, not addressed, not sealed. A note. Everything is handled, it read. She's overseas, proceed as discussed. No signature. I took a photo of it. Then another, closer. That evening, the gardener returned one last time. They told me not to come back tomorrow, he said. Said they're restructuring. I nodded. Thank you for telling me. He hesitated. You'll be okay, ma'am? I will, I said, and for the first time, I meant it. That night, I sat in the guest house with a notebook and my phone. I made calls, quiet ones, to people my husband assumed I'd lost touch with. I wasn't panicking, I was preparing. They thought the hard part was over. They were wrong. The next morning, my husband left early. No goodbye. No reminder about Paris. No questions at all. That silence told me everything. I waited an hour, then walked into the main house and sat at the kitchen table. I placed my phone face down in front of me and took a breath. My hands were steady. My voice when I finally spoke would be steady too. The first call was to our bank. I gave my name, my date of birth, the security answers I had memorized years ago and never thought I'd need again. I believe there's been a change to my accounts without my consent, I said calmly. There was a pause on the other end. I'll need to put you on a brief hold, ma'am. When she returned, her tone had changed. Yes, Mrs. Carter, she said. There were updates initiated last week. By whom? I asked. She hesitated. By your husband. Using a power of attorney. I see, I said. Please flag everything, effective immediately. There was another pause. Longer this time. I can do that, she said, but you'll need to come in. I will, I replied. Today. The second call was to a lawyer I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. He'd helped me settle my mother's estate. He remembered my name. I need you to listen carefully, I told him, and I need discretion. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. You did the right thing by staying, he said. Do not leave the country. I don't plan to, I replied. By midday, my husband returned home unexpectedly. He seemed startled to see me in the kitchen. I thought you'd be at the airport, he said. There was another delay, I answered. He nodded too quickly. Of course. He poured himself water, spilling a little on the counter. He wiped it with his sleeve. Did anyone come by? I asked casually. No, he said. Why? No reason. That afternoon, I went through the mail. Most of it was junk. Then I found an envelope addressed to me, forwarded from a law office I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice. Dry. Formal. A consultation confirmation. My husband's name listed as the primary contact. Regarding long-term property planning, I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That evening, he received a call while we were eating dinner. He stepped outside to answer it. I stayed where I was and listened through the open window. Yes, he said quietly. She's still overseas. A pause. No, she doesn't know. Another pause. I'll handle it. I took another bite of my food. I chewed slowly. That night, I didn't go to the guest house. I slept in the bedroom we shared. He didn't object. He lay stiff beside me, facing away. At 2:14 a.m., his phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. In the morning, I dressed carefully. I chose clothes he had overlooked. A coat still hanging behind the door, shoes still tucked under the bed. I left the house while he showered. At the bank, the manager met me personally. At the law office, my lawyer took notes with precision. At each place, I was treated not as a confused older woman, but as someone reclaiming ground. By the time I returned home, I felt different. Not angry, anchored. My husband looked up when I walked in. "You seem busy," he said. "I am," I replied. And for the first time, he didn't smile back. He was beginning to realize something had shifted. But he still didn't know how much. Not yet. By the 7th day, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room. My husband moved through it carefully now. He no longer hummed. He closed doors softly. He watched me the way people watch weather they can't predict. That morning, I heard him on the phone in the study. "She's still here," he said, his voice low. "Yes, I know that wasn't the plan." I paused in the hallway, holding a cup of coffee I no longer wanted. "No," he continued. "She hasn't said anything, but something's different." I walked away before he noticed me. Later that day, a woman I didn't recognize came to the house. Mid-40s. Polished. She carried a leather portfolio and wore heels she didn't bother to remove at the door. My husband introduced her as an advisor. She didn't look at me when she shook my hand. They sat at the dining table, spreading out documents. I stayed in the kitchen, close enough to hear, far enough to be ignored. "Once she's out of the picture," the woman said, "the process is straightforward." Out of the picture. My husband cleared his throat. "She's lingering." "That complicates things," the woman replied, "but not for long." I stirred my coffee, slow and steady. That evening, my lawyer called. "They've filed preliminary paperwork," he said. "Not finalized, but it's aggressive." "How aggressive?" I asked. "They're positioning you as unavailable," he replied. "Unreachable, potentially unfit to manage assets independently." I closed my eyes. "Thank you for telling me," I said. After dinner, my husband poured himself a drink. He offered me one. He hadn't done that in years. "You've been quiet," he said. "So have you," I replied. He nodded. "I just want what's best for both of us." I met his eyes. "So do I." That night, I checked my email. Buried between promotions and spam was a message marked urgent. From a clinic I had never visited. A missed appointment. A follow-up request. I forwarded it to my lawyer without responding. The next morning, the gardener didn't show up. Neither did the housekeeper. By noon, the property felt abandoned, stripped down to essentials. That afternoon, a courier arrived with a thick envelope, certified, addressed to me. Inside was a letter. It spoke in careful language, concerned language. It suggested evaluations, support, temporary arrangements while I recovered from travel-related fatigue. Paris again. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. When my husband came home, I left it on the kitchen counter where he would see it. He picked it up, read it once, then again. "They're just being cautious," he said. "I'm sure," I replied. He watched me closely. "Do you remember signing the forms last year?" "Yes," I said. "I remember what you told me they were for." He shifted his weight. "You trusted me." "I did," I said. The silence stretched between us. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in days. Not because I felt safe, but because I felt resolved. In the morning, I dressed with intention. I chose a jacket with deep pockets. I placed copies of documents inside. Photos, notes, timelines. I left the house without telling him where I was going. At the courthouse, I requested records. At the bank, I updated instructions. At my lawyer's office, I signed papers that shifted leverage quietly, legally. By the time I returned home, the sun was setting. My husband was pacing the living room. "Where were you?" he asked. "Taking care of things," I replied. He stared at me, really stared this time. For the first time since this began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Not fear, but doubt. And that was enough to tell me I was exactly where I needed to be. By the 8th day, memories began lining up in my mind like quiet witnesses. Not accusations, facts. Moments I had brushed aside over the years because it was easier to believe in peace than to question intention. I stood in the hallway that afternoon, staring at the empty space where a framed photo used to hang. A picture of me and my husband on our 40th anniversary. I remembered how it disappeared shortly after we took it. "I'll get it cleaned," he'd said back then. "The glass is dusty." It never came back. I moved through the house slowly, letting my hands trail along familiar surfaces. Each room carried echoes, conversations, decisions made without me, smiles that ended the moment I turned away. In the living room, I remembered the first time I was asked not to speak. We'd been hosting friends. A financial discussion came up. I started to offer my opinion, something I'd researched myself. My husband interrupted me gently, with a hand on my arm. "Let me handle this," he'd said. "It's complicated." Everyone nodded. I smiled and stayed quiet. That was years ago. In the kitchen, I remembered the remodel. How I'd chosen warm colors, softer lighting. He'd changed everything while I was visiting my sister. White, sharp, efficient. "You'll get used to it," he'd said. I did. Upstairs, I opened drawers that no longer held my things. I remembered the gradual way my choices had been reduced. First finances, then schedules, then decisions about our own home. I had told myself it was partnership, division of labor, trust. But trust only works when it goes both ways. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my daughter. "Dad says you're in Europe," she said cheerfully. "How's Paris?" I closed my eyes. "It's beautiful," I replied, "but plans change." She hesitated. He sounded worried. "I'm sure he is," I said. After the call, I sat at the dining table and let myself feel it fully for the first time. Not heartbreak, not rage, grief. Grief for the woman I had been, the one who believed being agreeable was the same as being valued. The one who thought silence kept the peace when it really just created space for others to move freely. That evening, I reviewed my notes again, dates, names, conversations overheard, documents photographed. There was a pattern now, clearer than before. Everything had escalated after I turned 65. That was when the talk of simplifying began, of future planning, of making things easier for everyone. Everyone but me. I remembered a dinner from last year. My husband had joked, laughing, she wouldn't last a week on her own. Everyone laughed. I had laughed too. Now, sitting alone in the guest house, that laughter felt distant, almost foreign. I wasn't weak. I wasn't confused. I wasn't incapable. I had simply been convenient. That night, I took out an old address book I hadn't touched in years. Names written in ink. People who had known me before I learned to shrink. I made 3 calls. The first was to a friend from my early career. She listened without interrupting. The second was to a former colleague who now worked in elder advocacy. She asked careful questions. The third was to my sister. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "You're not imagining this," she finally said. "I know," I replied. After I hung up, I felt lighter. Not because the situation was resolved, but because the fog had lifted. They hadn't underestimated my intelligence. They had underestimated my awareness. I lay down that night and stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. I thought about Paris again, about how easily I could have boarded that plane, how neatly I could have vanished into someone else's narrative. Instead, I was here, watching, remembering, assembling the truth piece by piece. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt like I was reclaiming authorship of my own story, quietly, deliberately, and with no intention of handing it back. By the 9th day, the house began to resist him, not in obvious ways, in small ones. The garage door stalled halfway down. The security system chimed twice before setting. His phone calls went unanswered longer than usual. Things he relied on without thinking no longer moved smoothly. That morning, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, fingers hovering over the keys. He stared at the screen longer than necessary, then closed it without typing anything. I watched from the doorway. He looked older to me then. Not fragile, just exposed, like someone realizing the script he'd been following no longer worked. Around noon, the gardener returned. He wasn't supposed to. He stood by the fence, hat in his hands, eyes scanning the property before he spoke. "They told me not to come back," he said, "but I couldn't leave without saying something." I nodded. "You don't have to." "They've been planning this longer than you think?" he continued. "I heard them weeks ago, talking about timelines, about when it would be easiest." "Easiest for whom?" I asked. He looked down. "For paperwork, for explanations." I thanked him again. He left quietly the way he always did. That afternoon, my lawyer called. "They're rushing," he said. "That usually means they're nervous." "About what?" I asked. "About losing control of the narrative," he replied. Control. That word followed me through the house as I moved room to room. It explained so much. Why decisions were framed as concern. Why my independence had been slowly narrowed. Why Paris had been chosen. Far enough to complicate things. Close enough to sound reasonable. That evening, my husband tried a different approach. He cooked dinner. Not reheated food. A full meal. He set the table properly. He poured wine. "We should talk," he said. "We are," I replied. He smiled thinly. I just want to make sure you're comfortable. I am, I said. He paused. You don't seem excited about Paris anymore. I'm reconsidering. His hand tightened slightly around his glass. It's all arranged, he said. It would be disruptive to change plans. Disruptive to whom? I asked. He didn't answer. Later, after he went to bed, I opened my laptop and reviewed the documents my lawyer had sent earlier that day. Amendments, notices, requests for records. One message stood out, a scheduling confirmation, a meeting set for the following week, in my name, with parties I hadn't agreed to meet. I forwarded it immediately. Then I shut the laptop and sat in the dark. I thought about how carefully he had constructed this, how patient he had been, how confident he had mistaken my quiet for compliance. The next morning, a letter arrived by courier. This one was different, shorter, firmer, a request for my presence, in person, no mention of travel, no assumptions. I placed it on the counter where he would see it. When he came home and read it, his face drained of color. That's not necessary, he said quickly. We can handle this privately. I don't think so, I replied. He stared at me. You're making this difficult. I met his gaze. You made it complicated. The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger, with recalculation. That night, he slept on the couch. I stayed in the bedroom, awake, listening to the house settle around me. I wasn't imagining things anymore. I wasn't waiting for proof. I had it. And somewhere deep inside, I sensed the shift, the moment when a plan begins to unravel, not because it's exposed all at once, but because the person it was built against refuses to disappear. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow would matter. By the 10th day, the tension in the house had settled into something colder. Acceptance, on his side. Certainty, on mine. He no longer pretended this was about Paris. The word itself vanished from our conversations, like a place that no longer existed on the map. Instead, he spoke carefully, choosing phrases the way lawyers do when they want options left open. That morning, he sat across from me at the kitchen table. I've been thinking, he said. Maybe it's time we simplify things. I looked at him. We already have. He flinched, just slightly. There are arrangements that make sense at our age, he continued. Support, structure, less stress. For whom? I asked. For you, he said quickly. This has all been a lot. I folded my hands in front of me. It has. He leaned back, studying my face, searching for cracks, confusion, fear, anything familiar. He didn't find it. That afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. Sad. They're requesting an evaluation, he said. Voluntary for now. For now, I repeated. Yes, he replied. They're testing compliance. I thanked him and hung up. When my husband came home that evening, he was carrying a folder, a thin one. He placed it on the counter between us. It's just information, he said. No decisions. I opened it. Pamphlets, calm colors, smiling faces, words like care and transition and peace of mind. I closed the folder. You already decided, I said. He didn't deny it. I thought you'd understand, he replied. This is easier. Easier, I echoed. Yes, he said. Cleaner. That word again. I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I am not confused, I said. I am not absent, and I am not going anywhere. His jaw tightened. You don't have to make this adversarial, he said. You made it procedural, I replied. The silence stretched between us. That night, I slept in the guest house again, not to hide, to think. I reviewed the timeline one more time. The power of attorney, the consultations, the calls, the letters, the moving truck, the assumptions layered on top of each other. They weren't mistakes. They were steps. The next morning, I dressed with care. I chose neutral colors. Nothing that suggested fragility. Nothing that suggested defiance. At 10 o'clock, a car pulled into the driveway. Not the black van this time. A sedan. Official. Polite. My husband stood by the window, watching. You don't have to do this, he said. I know, I replied. I stepped outside before he could say anything else. The woman who stepped out of the car introduced herself. Calm voice, professional smile. I'm here to talk, she said. So am I replied. We sat at the dining table. My husband stayed in the kitchen, pretending to clean. She asked gentle questions about my routine, my finances, my travel plans. I answered clearly, precisely, with dates and names and receipts. She paused midway through, pen hovering. You're very prepared, she said. I had time, I replied. She nodded slowly. When she left, she shook my hand, looked me in the eye. Someone will be in touch, she said. After the door closed, my husband didn't speak. Neither did I. That afternoon, my lawyer confirmed what I already sensed. They didn't get what they expected, he said. I hung up and stood by the window, watching the driveway. I felt no triumph, only steadiness. This was no longer about stopping him. It was about showing, quietly and unmistakably, that the version of me he had planned for no longer existed, and that his plan had been built on an absence that was never going to happen. Not anymore. By the 11th day, the house felt balanced again, not restored, reclaimed. My husband kept his distance now. He spoke when necessary. He chose his words carefully, as if each one carried weight. He no longer assumed anything about my plans. That change mattered. That morning, I received a call from my lawyer. They've withdrawn the request, he said. No further evaluations, no temporary measures. I closed my eyes. Why? Because they can't justify them, he replied, and because pushing further would expose more than they're willing to risk. I thanked him and hung up. My husband was in the living room when I walked in. He looked up from his phone. Everything okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Everything's clear. He nodded once. No follow-up. Later that day, I went through the house again, not searching this time, remembering. I opened cabinets that had been emptied and refilled them with what remained mine. I rehung clothes from boxes still stacked in the garage. I placed photos back where they belonged. I didn't rush. This wasn't about reclaiming space. It was about asserting presence. That afternoon, a courier arrived with documents addressed to both of us. Revised. Neutral. Careful. My husband read them in silence. This changes things, he said finally. Yes, I replied. It does. He looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. I didn't think you'd push back, he admitted. I know, I said. There was no accusation in my voice, no satisfaction either. Just truth. That evening, I made dinner. Nothing elaborate. Something warm, familiar. We ate at the table without speaking much. The tension was still there, but it had shifted. It no longer pressed down on me. Afterward, I sat in the guest house and reviewed the final messages from my lawyer. Confirmations, safeguards, boundaries put in place quietly, legally. Nothing dramatic. Nothing reversible. That night, I slept deeply. In the morning, I woke with a sense of direction I hadn't felt in years. I made a list. Practical things, appointments, conversations that needed to happen. I was no longer reacting. I was planning. My husband watched me gather papers at the kitchen counter. You're busy again, he said. Yes, I replied, with my own affairs. He didn't argue. Later that day, I met with an advisor of my choosing. One my husband hadn't suggested, one who spoke directly to me. We discussed options, timelines, independence. When I returned home, I felt steady, not triumphant, aligned. That evening, my husband approached me carefully. I misjudged you, he said. I considered his words. Yes, I replied. He waited, perhaps expecting more. There wasn't any. I had crossed a threshold he couldn't follow me past. Not because I shut him out, but because I had stepped fully into myself. That night, I stood by the window and looked out at the driveway where it had all begun. The taxis, the vans, the assumptions. I thought about how close I had come to disappearing, how neatly it could have happened. Instead, I was still here, visible, accounted for, decisive. Whatever came next would not be arranged for me. It would be chosen by me. And that was enough to know that the ending of this story would not be written by someone else. Not ever again. On the 12th day, I woke before sunrise. The house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Not tense, not watchful, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after something heavy has finally settled into place. I made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sky lighten inch by inch. The driveway was empty. No taxis, no vans, no strangers arriving with assumptions about my absence. I thought about Paris again, not with bitterness, with clarity. I imagined the version of myself who would have boarded that plane, who would have trusted the ticket, the itinerary, the smiling goodbye, who would have stepped into a city alone, believing she was being given freedom, not distance. She would have called home and heard excuses, delays, missed connections. She would have stayed longer than planned because it was easier than questioning why no one asked when she was coming back. She would have returned to a house already rearranged around her absence. That woman almost existed. Instead, I was here. Later that morning, my husband came into the kitchen. He looked tired, older than I remembered him being just weeks ago. He poured coffee and leaned against the counter. I never thought it would end like this, he said quietly. Neither did I replied. He waited, perhaps hoping I would soften the moment with reassurance. I didn't. This wasn't how I planned things, he continued. I know, I said. There was a long pause. I thought you'd go, he admitted. I thought it would be simpler. Simpler for you, I said gently. He nodded once. There was nothing left to argue about. No accusation that needed to be spoken aloud. The truth had already taken up its space between us. That afternoon, I packed a small bag. Not to leave the house, to leave the story that had been written for me. I moved into the guest house fully. Not as a hiding place, as a boundary, a decision. It felt right. In the days that followed, life rearranged itself quietly. Appointments were kept, documents finalized, conversations had with people who spoke to me directly, not around me. The gardener returned, briefly, to finish a job he'd started long ago. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. I began walking in the mornings again. Same route my husband used to take. Headphones on, unreachable. The difference was, I knew exactly where I was going. One afternoon, my daughter called. Dad says things are changing, she said carefully. They are, I replied. There was a pause. Are you okay? I smiled. I am more than okay. And I was. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing about me was missing anymore. I had spent years making myself smaller so things could run smoothly. Years believing that harmony required silence. Years mistaking being needed for being valued. That chapter was closed. I still live on the property. I still wake up to the same trees, the same light. But the air feels different now, clearer. I am not confused. I am not absent. I'm not waiting to be managed. I think about the gardener's hand on my wrist sometimes, about how one small moment of honesty changed everything. Please don't go. Trust me. I did. And by staying, I found something I didn't know I'd lost. My footing. If you're listening to this and something feels off in your own life, don't ignore it. Pay attention to the quiet moments. The details people assume you won't notice. The plans that require your absence to succeed. You don't have to shout. You don't have to confront right away. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay. I stayed, and because of that, I didn't disappear. I became visible again, on my own terms.